It started on a night like any other. I had just climbed into bed after a long day at work. My tiny apartment was silent. The hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the background. I remember checking my phone one last time before setting it down, the glow of the screen fading into darkness as I closed my eyes. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but something felt wrong. My body was heavy, as if weighed down by an invisible force. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move a single muscle. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but never experienced it myself. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I saw him. At first, it was just a shadow, a figure at the far end of my bed. My heart raced as I tried to focus on it, praying it was just an illusion in the dim light of my room. But the figure didn't dissolve. It moved. Slow, deliberate steps brought it closer, and the shape became more defined. It was a child, a boy, no older than 7 or 8. His head was wrong, misshapen, like it had been crushed on one side. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a cold dread seep into my chest. I wanted to scream, to get up, to do anything to break free, but my body refused to respond. The boy stood there, staring at me, his expression unreadable. There was something profoundly unsettling about his silence, as though he were studying me, deciding what to do next. The minutes stretched endlessly. I kept thinking, this isn't real. It's just a dream. But everything felt too vivid. The faint draft from the window, the creak of the floorboards as he moved. It wasn't until the shadow of morning began creeping into my room that he vanished. When I finally regained control of my body, I bolted upright, gasping for air as though I'd been underwater. My heart was pounding, and sweat clung to my skin. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't sleep again that night. The memory of those hollow eyes burned into my mind. Even now, I don't know what terrifies me more, that it was just a vivid dream, or that it wasn't a dream at all. After that night, I couldn't shake the image of the boy with the misshapen head. I told myself it was just a hallucination, a trick of my exhausted mind. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. A few nights later, I had a dream, or at least, I think it was a dream. In it, I was in the same apartment, but everything felt off. The air was heavy, and the walls seemed to pulse like they were alive. A girl appeared, standing at the foot of my bed. She looked to be around my age, maybe early 20s, with dark hair tied in a loose braid. Her expression was solemn, almost pitying. "You've seen David," she said, her voice soft but tinged with urgency. I didn't respond. I didn't know how. "He doesn't like questions," she continued, stepping closer. "If you see him again, you can ask him 2 things. Only 2. And you must begin by saying, 'Dear David.'" Her gaze locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "But don't ask a third. No matter what. Do not ask a third." Before I could say anything, the dream shifted. The girl was gone, and I was left alone in the dark, her warning echoing in my mind. When I woke up, the weight of her words lingered. It felt more like a memory than a dream, as if she had truly been there. For the next few days, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights set my nerves on edge. I started to notice small, inexplicable things, objects slightly out of place, faint whispers in the dead of night. I even tried to convince myself it was paranoia, that I was feeding into my own fear. But then, I saw David again. It was during the day this time, while I was sitting at my desk. The sunlight streaming through the window did little to dispel the chill that ran down my spine when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, and there he was, standing in the hallway, half hidden in shadow. His hollow eyes bore into me, and for a moment, I was frozen, just like before. The girl's warning rang in my head. 2 questions. No more. I don't know what possessed me to speak, but I did. My voice shook as I whispered, "Dear David." "What do you want?" The boy didn't move, didn't blink, but his lips parted slightly, and though no sound came, I understood his answer. "You." A shiver ran down my spine, but I pressed on. "Dear David, how did you die?" This time, his lips moved in slow, deliberate motion. A shelf fell on me. The answer was so mundane, so unassuming, that it caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to ask another question, but stopped myself just in time. David tilted his head, as if he was waiting for me to slip up. His silence stretched thick and oppressive. Then, just like that, he was gone. I sat there for hours, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The girl's warning had been clear. 2 questions, no more. But the temptation to ask more was overwhelming. That was the day I realized I was in far deeper than I'd ever imagined. Days passed, but I couldn't stop thinking about David. His presence lingered like a shadow, always at the edge of my awareness. Every creak, every flicker of light felt like a warning. I tried to distract myself with work, with friends, with anything to take my mind off what I'd seen and heard. But nothing helped. I became obsessed with the details of his story. A shelf. How could something so trivial lead to whatever this was? One night, after hours of pacing and overthinking, I made the mistake. It started innocently enough. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. My heart sank. Slowly, I turned my head toward the hallway, and there he was. David. This time, he was closer, his frail form illuminated by the dim glow of the hallway light. His head was tilted slightly, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. I should have ignored him. I should have turned away, but I didn't. "Dear David," the words slipped out before I could stop myself. "Who pushed the shelf?" The room seemed to hold its breath. David didn't respond right away. His gaze darkened, and for the first time, I saw something else in his expression: anger. Then, his lips moved, forming a single, silent word: "you." The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. You. Was he blaming me? Accusing me? The thought was absurd, impossible. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The need to understand was too great. How is that possible? The question left my mouth before I even realized I'd spoken it. As soon as the words were out, I knew I'd made a mistake. The temperature in the room plummeted, and a low, guttural hum filled the air. David's small frame began to tremble, and his hollow eyes widened, filled with a rage so intense it seemed to pierce right through me. The lights flickered violently, and I felt a pressure in my chest, as if the air itself was turning against me. I tried to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. David stepped closer, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. The hum grew louder, turning into a deafening roar. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. David was gone. The room was silent. I sat there, gasping for breath, my heart racing. I had broken the rule, and now I knew there was no going back. After that night, my life became a waking nightmare. Whatever tethered David to me had strengthened. I could no longer chalk up the strange occurrences to my imagination or some lingering effect of sleep paralysis. It started subtly. Doors that I'd closed were suddenly open. Items I'd carefully placed were inexplicably moved. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I'm distracted. But then, the noises began. At night, I'd hear soft tapping coming from inside the walls. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone was trying to communicate. I'd lie in bed, paralyzed by fear, as the tapping grew louder, moving closer until it was right above my headboard. One evening, I was in the kitchen washing dishes when the lights flickered again. My heart sank, and I froze, gripping the edge of the sink. From the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow dart across the hallway. "David." My voice cracked as I called out, though I instantly regretted it. The room felt colder, heavier, as though the air had turned to stone. I turned off the faucet and reached for a towel, but before I could dry my hands, I heard it, a whisper. Faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. "You broke the rule." I spun around, but the kitchen was empty. That night, I decided I couldn't sleep in my room. I sat up on the couch, with every light in the apartment blazing. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of scraping. It was faint at first, like nails dragging against wood. I sat up, heart pounding, trying to locate the source. Then I saw it. On the far wall of the living room, faint but unmistakable, were scratch marks. 3 long, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through me. And as I backed away, I felt something brush against my ankle. Looking down, I saw nothing, but the sensation was undeniable, cold and skeletal, like fingers gripping me. I bolted into my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and huddled under the covers like a child. But no amount of blankets could shield me from the truth. David wasn't just a ghost haunting my dreams. He was here in my reality, and he wasn't going anywhere. The final straw came a week later. By this point, my nerves were shot, and my apartment felt more like a prison than a home. The air always seemed heavier, as though the walls themselves were pressing inward. I avoided the dark, slept with every light on, and jumped at every sound. One evening, as I sat at my desk attempting to distract myself with work, my computer flickered. The screen went black, and then it turned back on, displaying a single message. 2 questions. My chest tightened. I pushed my chair back, staring at the screen in disbelief. The message disappeared as quickly as it appeared, replaced by my normal desktop. Had I imagined it? Was I finally losing my grip on reality? I tried to stand, but the moment I rose, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. The glow from the computer screen was the only source of light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and impossibly close. They weren't in the hallway or the apartment above. They were in the room with me. David. My voice wavered, barely above a whisper. No response. Only the rhythmic tapping of footsteps drawing nearer. The shadows on the wall shifted, elongating unnaturally. The room grew colder, and I felt a familiar, suffocating pressure on my chest. The same sensation as in my sleep paralysis. But this time, I was awake. Why didn't you follow the rules? The voice was soft, childlike, yet filled with an edge of malice that made my skin crawl. I turned slowly, and there he was. David stood in the corner of the room, illuminated by the faint light from the monitor. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and his hollow, unblinking eyes locked onto mine. The dent in his skull was grotesque, a stark reminder of the accident that had claimed his life. I didn't mean to, I stammered, backing away until I hit the desk. He took a step closer, his small frame radiating an overwhelming sense of dread. You asked 3 questions. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know. David's expression remained unchanged as he raised his hand, pointing directly at me. The room grew darker, the walls seeming to close in, and his voice echoed, distorted and otherworldly. You broke the rule. Now you're mine. The last thing I remember was the sensation of being pulled downward, as though the ground itself had opened beneath me. The world spiraled into darkness, and I felt cold hands gripping me from every direction. When I woke up, I was on the floor of my apartment, the lights flickering erratically. David was gone, but the room bore the evidence of his visit. Deep scratches on the walls, overturned furniture, and the faint echo of his laughter lingering in the air. Since that night, my life hasn't been the same. I moved out of the apartment, but no matter where I go, I feel him. In the shadows, in the stillness of the night, in the faint tapping against the walls. David isn't just a ghost haunting an apartment. He's a curse, a relentless reminder of a mistake I'll never be able to undo.